And okay, and so today I'm going to provide an overview. Okay, yeah, and today I'm going to provide an overview of the module. So we were not covering anything specific yet. And just say introducing what module will cover, what the coursework like, what are the marking schemes, and answer all your questions. And okay, and the module is web-based mobile app development, and it's a fairly long name. And I deliberately didn't say it's mobile app development. We'll explain the difference between just say the native mobile app development and web-based app development. They are quite different. Okay, just a little bit of background, and this is a new module started in 2019, so it's 2 years ago now. So this is like the third one, and then I created this module, and partly because there's popularity among the students that want to develop apps for mobile phones, and we didn't have one in the module, in the department, and it turns out this is a quite popular module. Okay, and what you see currently on the module page and are the contents from last year, and then there might still be slight changes for this year. Obviously, things need to be updated for 2021, for example, the dates of the coursework assignment, but there's also maybe some changes in terms of the contents and in terms of the assessment, but these will be small. So just be aware there might still be some changes. And actually, I might show you just very quickly what the module page look like. So this is the module page. And so that's the link for the Zoom and the lab. So it will be the same for all the sessions. And then you can see we have all the contents there. And for 24 weeks, everything about the coursework is under assessment feedback. We'll talk about this more in detail. And obviously the deadline here needs to be updated. And if you expand these, you can see the lectures. Hang on, let me just change to a student. So you'll just see. So you can see the view that you will see. Okay, and so you had the lecture and then the lab exercise. And sometimes you would also have lecture recordings. Again, these are the recordings from last year. And so the content will be very similar, but once I done the lecture this year, I'll replace these and with the new videos from this year. And so again, most of the content will remain the same, and there might be some slight changes. Okay. I'll have to go back. Okay, where did my slides go? Okay. Apologies. How do I spell?
Excuse me, sir. Could you provide us with the one-time code for the check-in on the app?
Oh, yes. Hang on, let me do that as well. I'd like to first get rid of this one first. Okay, and I will, find out what is the registration code for, and put that in the chat. That will be in the and okay, let me put the Yeah. Can you see the code now in the chat?
Yep, we can.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, do remind me if I forgot. I mean, I kept forgetting. I haven't got used to this yet. And the checking code thing. Okay, back to the slides. Yeah, as I mentioned, so currently the slides and video on the module page I just showed and are from last year. There might be slightly changes. I will do the new recordings and then put them on there afterwards, after each lecture. Okay, and at the very beginning I mentioned, and I deliberately didn't put, say, mobile app development as a title. So I want to explain the two different types of mobile app development. And some of them you might be aware, but maybe some of you are not. And so actually when people talk about mobile app development, and in many times they actually talk about native app development. And what it means is it's using the programming language and specific for a particularly mobile systems, such as iOS or Android, and used to be more like Windows. Now really it's only two. And each of these kind of mobile system had its preferred language. And for iOS, and it used to be Objective-C, and now it's also Swift, which is like a new language created by Apple. And for Android, and it's mostly Java. And most recently, there's also Kotlin, which is like a slightly different flavored Java. It's still mostly Java with some simplification or new nice features, but essentially it's still Java. So these are the languages you need to learn if you want to develop native Android apps. And so I guess this is the dominant way to develop mobile apps when apps just become popular, say 10 years ago. And some advantages, and they are fast, and compared to the second approach, and they have easy access to the hardware features. And for example, for each new generation of iPhone, it might introducing some new hardware which wasn't there before. And if you're using native development, say for example the Apple development kit, I can remember the exact name, you will have easy access to these hardware features. And the disadvantages will be, and the app you developed only works on one mobile systems. And so if you create an iOS app using Swift, and it will not work on Android. And if you want to have your app on Android as well, you have to redo the whole thing in Java or Kotlin. So which essentially double the development cost. Okay, and also because they are using completely different developer tools, languages, so you have to learn new for the new platform. And also another advantage is these things does not work on the web. And if you develop an app, you can't. Say people cannot open that in the browser on the web. And it's really only just working on the specific platforms they are developed for. Okay, and then the second approach, sometimes people call it hybrid app development, and they also have a slightly different names and has nothing to do with hybrid learning. Okay, and the difference now is it's using the programming language and which are independent of the mobile systems. So this can be JavaScript, and for example, there are different libraries or framework, or JavaScript libraries or framework allows you to develop mobile apps. And so there's native script, which actually we used to cover in the module, but probably not anymore for this year. And there's reactive native, so it's based on reactive and framework, and there's Ionic, and which works better with, and say the other framework, the Angular framework. Okay, but it doesn't have to be JavaScript. It can also be other languages, for example, and you can write code in .NET or C#, and this library called or tools called Xamarin. I don't know exactly what's the right pronunciation for the word, but that's tools or software developed by Microsoft. So it allows you to write code in .NET or C#, and then they can convert the app into mobile apps. Okay, and the advantage is, so the app developed this way, and it will work on both Android or iOS. And essentially, you write the code once, and then you compile it, depends on your target platforms. You will create a version for the Android, a different version for the iOS. But you don't have to rewrite the code. You only write the code once. And you can use the languages and tools you already know. For example, if you're already familiar with JavaScript, and then you can use some JavaScript libraries or framework. You don't have to learn, say, Java or Objective-C, or add a new set of tools associated with them. And similarly, if you're a C# developer, you can still, or even for Python, you can have different libraries to do these things. So you don't have to learn a new language. And if you develop something, for example, using JavaScript, and it will work online as well, because JavaScript is native to a browser. So long as a browser, it will be able to work. Again, you don't have to create a third version, and just so people can use it online. Okay, but there's always kind of downside as well. And so the downside is, there's a slightly slower than native apps. And so partly, and this is because you need something like maybe conceptually like a translation layer. So you translate your JavaScript code to the code that Android system understand and then run. So there's a little bit penalty in there, but this is much less an issue now. And because now the mobile phone chips is so fast, and the slowdown caused by this translation is minimum. User almost cannot feel it, cannot even see the difference. Okay, and another disadvantage, what I would also say is quite slight in the sense is you will need plugins to access special hardware features. Okay, this is really specialized hardware features. And for example, if you want to access, say, the GPS of the phone or the camera on the phone, you can do this. And most of these frameworks would support them already. But you can, if you want to support some very special sensors, for example, only iPhone has. And I don't know, they have this like a beacon chips and allow you to Bluetooth communication for location list. And if you want to use that specific features, and you might need additional plugins for whichever the framework you use, and to use that particular features in your app. So this is, I guess, only applies to a small percentage of the apps when you need these special features. And for most, let's say, e-commerce type of apps, you need user login, and you allow user to do search and make, say, create a user account and make a booking, so those things. You don't need, and that would make no difference at all. And I mean, using these plugins is not impossible. It's just a slightly extra work. So you have to load an extra library, find the library, load it in your code, and then you should be able to use it. So it's not really end of the day. It's not that much extra work. Okay, and as you probably have guessed, this module would cover hybrid app development only. So we will not teach native app development using either, say, for either iOS or Android. And then one of the reasons, so personally, I believe this is the direction things will go, and because for most of the apps, it will be more than enough, and the features that hybrid development can provide. And many of the most popular apps are actually already hybrid apps, and you're using them, you don't even realize them. So that's in a sense shown there's really little difference from users' perspective and in terms of the native and hybrid apps, Whereas from the developer point of view, using the hybrid apps is way faster for development. You don't have to at least say duplicated effort or even and do the same app three times for Android, iOS, and the app and the web. Okay, so I'm listing something here: Facebook, Instagram, Airbnb, Uber, Discord, and Skype, Tesla, or Pinterest. So they all have apps and they all have hybrid apps and versions on these. Some only has hybrid app versions. And so I guess, and this also show, and currently the hybrid app development is very mature, and I wouldn't say so 5 years ago. Now it's very mature, and you can see it adopted by all these big companies. They're good for production purposes already. Okay, and then now come back to what this module covers. So we explained and what is hybrid app development. And particularly for this module, we're going to using some JavaScript framework and for the hybrid app development. So that come back to the title why it's called web-based, because it's JavaScript-based and hybrid app development. And so to do that, first we're going to introducing more advanced development, more advanced web app development. So most of you would have done this second year module, which covers at least the basics of the front end and back end development involved in JavaScript development. So I'm going to introduce something a bit more. The first of them is the front end framework. And so you could create your front end completely using they call vanilla or plain JavaScript without using any tools. But using a framework, we usually will make your life much easier. And there are a few popular tools, which I'll talk more later. And in this particular module, we're going to focus on the Vue.js. And the other two most popular ones is probably Angular and React. We'll discuss the difference between them, I think, next week when we're introducing the Vue framework. So Vue, and think of this way, so Vue framework is something like a jQuery, which introduce some nice new functions, which allows you to make you write less code. And if you really want, you can complete everything without using the library. There's nothing, say, you can only do with Vue. Okay, so that's the front end. And in the back end, we're going to talk about REST APIs. I'm going to using Node, Express.js, and MongoDB. So I think the Node and the MongoDB particularly would have been covered to some extent in the second year module. And so for this module, we're going to spend more time on Express.js. There is a difference between what we will use here to communicate between the front and the back end compared to what you did in the second year module, at least from what I remember when I was teaching that module a few years back. And at that time, and the way you talk to the backend is you talk to the database directly. So for example, in your code, in the front end of the code, you would have say, the username, password, and the IP address of the MongoDB server, and then you can log in. And when you need to read or save something from the database, you need to know exactly the name of the collections in the MongoDB, etc., etc. Okay, and this is not quite possible in practice. And say, for example, if you create an app would allow user to save their username, password, you cannot put your, say, server database login password in the app. That's not secure. And also, for example, the address of the server might change. And so as a result, you need something which is where the REST API comes in. So you probably wouldn't know API, which is a application programming interface, which essentially just says, it's almost like an interface allows you to call the functions from a library, but this is usually in front of some database or some server. So instead of talking to the database, MongoDB in this case directly, you talk to this API you send a request, just similar as you would type google.com, and it will send the request to its search and API, and it will return some results. So you don't have to worry about exactly what database is behind it and what syntax or query language you need to use, whether the servers change the IP address or URL, and all these will be taken care by the API itself. And this will be mostly done by the Express. Okay, and then the third new things we're going to introducing is called the progressive web apps. And so will be the type of web apps in the sense they're developed in JavaScript, and they behave almost like native mobile apps in the sense, and you can install them. You can even add them to, say, Google Play Store. People can search or install them. And it works on the phone. It has icons on your home screen. It works offline, etc., etc. So these are the three things we're going to cover. And then there's some other supporting technologies. So these are the first, the Vue, the Express, and the progressive web apps, or PWA, are the main technologies. Actually, for the progressive web apps, it's different from the single page application, which some of you may have done in the second year module. The single page application means the application is in theory or in one page. You change between different view of the app. And that's a different concept compared to the progressive web apps. Okay, and back here, so we have other supporting technologies. And so we're going to introducing code versioning, which is using Git. And someone of you might use it, someone might not. And it is actually very useful in quite a few different ways. For example, you can put your code on GitHub, and then you can make it available, and then it becomes part of your portfolio when you're looking for a job, and you can show people what you have done quite easily. And also it keeps tracks of different versions of your code. And so if you want to go back to any previous version, so long as you saved it, you can always go back to. And finally, it also ensures you will never lose your code. And because we're going to be using GitHub, which is online server, that means your code is always backed up online. So even you lost your computer, your USB stick's broken, you still have your code. It's all running fine. Okay, so we're going to be using Git. It's not that difficult, but also it's quite important skills. And if you want to be a software developer, you must be using Git. I think there's very few companies that's not using Git and doing development. And if a company that doesn't use Git, you might think twice whether you really want to join that company or not. I think. Anyway, and so that's Git. And also later on, you will see for all the coursework, you actually need to submit and to GitHub anyway. Okay, and we'll cover a little bit more advanced JavaScript features. Mostly the target is ES6. So as you're probably aware, JavaScript itself is an evolving language. So there's new features added each year. So the EX6 is just like and I think it stands for ECMAScript 6, which is some script standard that JavaScript follows and don't have to worry about. And the 6, like the version you have 7, 8, 9, 10. And the other way, the version JavaScript standard is using a year. And so ECMAS ES6 is ES 2015. So that's the standard introduced in 2015. And it's really not that new now. And you have 2016, 18, 19, 20, 21. Okay. But this is a quite significant change. So that version, lots of new things is introduced. So we're going to cover some of these features. And in the lecture, we're not going to have, say, a specific lecture, say, oh, this is a lecture, we'll cover all the features in ES6. No. Rather, so we're going to just introduce as we come along, as we see that in the code examples. And so the smaller changes, for example, and you can have, say, instead of using var, you have let and const. So you can define constant or variables. And there's way of writing, different way to writing functions. They call it anonymous functions. You can use this arrow function to define a function when it doesn't have a name. So these are relatively small changes. And there's a bigger changes. For example, it introduced the concept of class. Okay, so class is object-oriented, is like the cornerstone of the object-oriented programming. And it's used to be, say, the key features of, say, JavaScript or any other, Java and other object-oriented programming languages. Now, JavaScript also supports it now from ES6. And we're not going to using class that much because class is really to better organize your code. Itself does not introducing any new features. It doesn't say it's something which you couldn't do without class. And now with class, you can do, there's no such cases. It just says you can organize your code a bit better into a class hierarchy. And you only really see the benefit when the code is getting quite large. So for this module, the code, you're going to get a few hundred lines maximum. And in most of these cases, this scale of code, if you have a few files and nice kind of file structure, and you completely fine. You don't really need class yet. Anyway, and also I'm going to talk about the package management using npm. And npm is actually part of the Node.js. So if you install Node.js, you would have npm installed. And here we just use mostly as a package management tool and allows you to install the different libraries you need. So instead of you manually download a library, you can use npm to find the place and download it. And more importantly, npm can download all the other libraries that the library relies on. For example, you want to use library A, but library A relies on library B, C, and D. And if you do this manually, you have to install all these 4 libraries. Whereas use npm, you just say, I want to install library A, and it will automatically check what this relies on and download all those libraries as well. But actually, saying this actually happens recursively in the sense, library A needs library B, but then B might need C and D might relies on library E and F, and goes on. So the npm can sort all these out automatically for you, which is very useful. And then the downside is, say, it may end up downloading lots of libraries in the end, even you just want one. And it's download its dependency and its dependencies and so on. We'll see that very soon. Okay, and also we'll cover a little bit, say, the REST API testing using a tool called Postman. And so once you created the API, REST API using Express, you want to test it, even just validate it's working. And you need both the front, backend, and the middle and where, which is REST API to get it to work. Postman will make that a little bit easier. Okay, some kind of more practical things, how the things will run. And the lecture is 1.5 hours, which is a bit different and compared to the other modules. And maybe most of them will be 1 hour lecture. And here we'll have 1.5 hour lecture because I just found there's so many things to cover. 1 hour is not enough. And then the entire module will be project-based. So we're kind of building towards the final goal is an e-commerce course platform app. And we will not be able to build, say, a commercial or production level of the e-commerce app by the end of the module, but at least you should have the knowledge of the important components and in a commerce app. So at least the front end, the back end, and the middleware, the API, the important things, for example, how do you do search, etc. Okay, and there will be lots of live coding, and so bring your laptop and code it along. So this is actually for the lab lecture session, not just the lab. So because it's a very practical module, I'm going to show you how to do these different things. For example, how to use the Vue framework. I'm going to do live coding, so you can see exactly how that was created. And we will definitely came across some errors. For example, even I was stuck, so something didn't quite work. I couldn't get the code run, even I know everything looks all right, or I know it was working, and we'll try to debug the whole thing together. I think this is also a very important part of the programming, because you will never get the code to run the first time you wrote it, unless you just copy paste it. Yeah, even you copy paste it, it might not work. So how to find errors and how to sometimes just teeny tiny things and to make your code work. I think it's also part of it. Important skills for programming. So that's why I will prefer to do live coding, which is always a bit risky. And if you have a laptop, you can come along, just code on your own laptop. And if you had questions or had stuck, you can ask me. I'll try to answer, but may not always be possible during the lecture because the time is a little bit limited. But as I said, the lectures is always recorded, so you can always follow on later at your own pace, and I can try to answer your questions after the lecture as well. Okay, and so that's the lecture. Okay, I got someone. Okay, I can't really know your name, but it says Freedom Chucks, is it? Do you have any question or?
Yeah, I have a question. So how about those who want to who are interested like in native app development? How do we go forward from here? So for those who want to sort of learn native app development, how does this accommodate us?
Oh, okay. And so if you only interested in native app development, then maybe this is not the module for you.
Okay.
Because you really need to start with, you first have to pick which platform you want to work in, pick the language. For example, you want to do Java, and you want to look at Android development kit. And so it will be a very different experience compared to what we are covering here.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say, and what you learn here may not be very useful for native app development. Yeah, because they are so different. Yeah, something keep in mind. And I'm not sure if we offer any native app development modules, but you can have a look if that is something what you really want to do.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I have Ado. I'm not sure again.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's correct.
Mm.
Just want to ask you, so we're meant to build an e-commerce, so we can't choose our own app, so it must be an e-commerce cross-platform. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Okay. Yeah. So for this module, and particularly the module's coursework, you will be given a very specific app to design or to create. Okay, and you can't choose your own ones. But so the features that you created in this coursework app is very similar or very common in any other apps. For example, you want to retrieve the data from database and show on the page. You want to have say search functions. You want to have user to be able to log in and or create an account. I think these are the common ones, which in any other apps you would have. For example, you have a shopping cart, people can add items to and remove.
Yeah,
And
okay,
so,
yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't really matter, for example, if you buy shoes or games or any other gadgets or something, service. And these are the basic functions actually, which will be very common. And really, also kind of part of the kind of idea behind the module is saying you really learn how to use these different frameworks, and you should be able to adapt to quite different, say, the commercial domain or industry quite easily, if that makes sense.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so there's some messages in the chat. Okay, by the way, so I really like, and if you have questions, ask anytime. Don't wait till the end, and just raise your hand. If I didn't see you raising your hand, just make a noise or something, and I'll try to.
I'm Suzu.
Yeah, is that William? You want to ask a question or?
Yeah, I was wondering so we're doing a follow along approach for we're going to build an app. You're going to sort of teach us how to build an e-commerce app. Are we doing a project on this? Are we doing like a project also on a side? Is it mostly like, do we need to submit a project, or do we just follow along?
Oh, okay. And so the app you need to build as a part of the module, as the module coursework, is quite similar to what I will be covered in the lecture. So you almost kind of have a step-by-step instructions how to implement the different features required for the coursework.
I see.
That makes sense. Yeah. And you could always add a bit more features based on what you learned, say other things you want interesting, and it's not required, but you can always add them to the app.
I think in your coursework, you mentioned that we sort of needed to let you know that if we ever use any like npm modules extra from Vue, do we still need to do that?
I don't think you need to say, for example, if I install any particular npm modules for the coursework, and there's no real limitations on what you can use. There's specific requirements for the coursework. For example, for the backend, you have to use Node and Express, and you might want to use some other modules, and that's completely fine. But if there's anything you're not allowed to use, I will specifically say. For example, say you're not allowed to use Mongoose because that's not the way we want to do the communication with the database. And if I didn't say, then you can use anything else.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and yes, I can see in the chat, and people talk about Angular and even Vue with TS, which is TypeScript. Yeah. Again, so in the next lecture, I will talk about say Vue, Angular, React, and why we choose Vue instead not the other two. And again, so TypeScript will be something very nice to teach, and it's just it's not quite possible to put all this in one module. So I think I already tried, and just to cover the things I wanted before, I already run out of time. And TypeScript certainly will be very nice, and also has better support in Vue 3, which we will not cover, unfortunately. Again, it just says introduced an extra complexity. It's very nice. So to me, the TypeScript is almost like, say, the class features for JavaScript. It does not bring you any new features. You still can do this exact same thing as before, but it makes your code more robust and easy to maintain, which is definitely a good thing, especially for the large one. But for people just starting writing code for a few hundred lines, the benefit is kind of not very obvious, and we really just didn't have time to include that. Okay, yeah, okay, and we're gonna leave. I mean, there's this ongoing debate between which framework is the best, React, Angular, or Vue, and so I'm pretty sure if you're good at any of these frameworks, you will be able to find a good job. And they're just different places. For example, Angular probably mostly for Google, and React for Facebook, and Vue for other companies, like I say. And Wikipedia decided to adopt Vue as a framework they would use for their Wikipedia website. Okay, anyway, we're gonna do these more technical discussions next week. Okay, I think we're slightly behind, so we need to move on in the lecture slides. Okay, so lab will be 1.5 hours, and there will be lots of group-based exercise, and some of these will be marked, but not all of them. And the idea will be really, so the group work is always a simpler and smaller version of the actual main coursework, which is individual ones. So the group work is give you a chance to practice, do something a bit simpler, but also do it in a group environment, so you can still have discussion with each other to learn from each other. And when do the actual coursework, the individual components, you have to do it by yourself. And hopefully, and by doing the group work, you'll be better prepared for actually the main individual work. Okay, and all the lectures and will be in Zoom, just this link. And this is the one link for these modules, the lectures, labs, and all the other sessions. For example, we might have Q&A, and just for coursework, so it'll be all in exactly the same Zoom link, and it's on the module page. And you probably get the link anyway, otherwise you will not be here. But I'll just show you where is the so this is the module page, and that will be the link. So the same link for the entire year. Oh, how do I get back? Okay, and then all the lectures will be recorded, and so I'm recording just as I'm recording now. And as already mentioned, you can already see some recordings on the module page. These are from last year. Those will be replaced once the new recording becomes available. Yeah, so I'm going to put them afterwards. And so usually, sometimes say later in today or tomorrow, so it should be online and should be there on the module page. Yeah, as I said, currently are the old ones from last year, and they will be replaced with new ones. And sometimes I say I might had some problems with recording, or you might just forgot to record, so I will not provide a new version. And in those cases, I think the have something, even if it's a little bit out of date, is still better than nothing there. Okay, and in terms of labs, and half the labs will be in person. So these are the odd weeks, week 1, 3, 5. So this week we'll have in-person lab. And then the other half of the labs will be online. So these are week 2, 4, 6, etc. And so last year we did all the labs online, which seems to be still work. So I think shouldn't be a problem. And you just need to remember half of the labs is in person on campus and the other half is online. And we'll use the Zoom as well, exactly the same link as for the lecture. There's no difference. Okay, and all the labs will not be recorded. So first, there's not that much material to cover, and also mostly just because GDPR reasons, data privacy concerns, we're not recording. Okay, and then say when we do the online lab session, and we're going to have group discussions, I'm going to using breakout rooms, and which is fairly straightforward to use if you haven't used that already from the other modules. And also say you will need to do presentations of your work for a group, and in those cases, and at least one person will need to show their screen. And let me just move this out of the way. Here. Okay, and so here is the schedule. So in total, there's 24 weeks, and the list is what we'll cover in each week. I don't really want to go through all of them and take a bit of time. Also, it does not make too much sense. And if you're interested to have a look, and it's also the same on the module page. You would have seen, okay, I have to open it again, I'll probably close it. So you will see week 1 overview, second week 2, JavaScript versus Vue, etc., etc. And these are exactly the same as the list in the slides. So you can already see what we'll be covering and each week. Okay, learning resources, you probably are very familiar with this one by now. And that's the link to the reading list for this module. And so actually there are a few important textbooks, and there's a Vue.js in action. So that's covering the Vue front-end framework. And there's Express.js in action. And so that covers the backend, the API part using Express.js. And so there's also this Git book, which covers how to use Git. And then this is some tutorial from the Mozilla Development Network and covers on the progressive web apps. Okay, so these are the important ones. And there's some other things. For example, this is a quite good book. And again, I think this one is also free. And in terms of if you want to improve or even just refresh your JavaScript skills. And this is the official Vue.js guide. I think if you just follow this book here, the Vue.js and in action, you don't really need this one. But some people might be interested. And this again, I think it's a free resource, tell you some of the versions and new features in the ES6 version of the JavaScript. And we will not be able to cover that many, not cover all of the, but this is a good resource to see what else is there. Okay. Yeah, these two kind of like legacy things that I did before, and if you have time, want to explore a little bit more, and you can have a look at them. Okay, let me see if I can get back to my. Okay, that's where the learning resource. And I'm sure you already know by now, say on the module page, you have this reading list link on the side, and it goes to exactly the same page as we were before. Let's go back. Or is it different? Okay, that's a different one. Okay, and let's talk about coursework now. And so assessment now, so it's coursework only, so that means no exams. We will have straight coursework. And so partly, and the reason, part of the reason to choose straight coursework, so the deadlines of these coursework will be slightly different from the other modules you do. So usually you get a deadline at the end of the first and second term. That's usually the deadline time. I try to avoid those by having straight courseworks. And so the first one is about front end. So we're going to develop a web app using Vue.js framework. And the second one is building the backend for the entire app. So they're using Node and Express. And the third one, you are creating make it into a progressive apps. So something which behave very much on like a native mobile app, which you can install on your phone, and also introducing a little bit more advanced features in Vue that you can use to make your apps looks nicer or works better. Okay, and you need overall 40% to pass the module, and obviously the maximum is 100%, and you need 40 to pass the module. And you don't need to pass each coursework. So if you fail in one of the coursework, that's fine. You can still do well in the other two. For example, if you've only got 5% from the first coursework, but you get 100% in the second and third, and you can still get a first for the entire module. So if you didn't do well in one coursework, don't worry too much. Just try to pick up the pace, put in a bit more effort, and you still get a good chance of passing the module. Okay, and okay, so as I said, and each coursework has a kind of group work component, which is like the simpler version, allows you to work as a group. Okay, and then this course group work will be marked in lab. It has worth 10%. We'll talk a bit more about the detailed breakdown in the next few slides. And you do this or introduce them in lab, and you might not be able to finish. You may have to spend a bit of time after lab, but you need to demonstrate to be marked. Okay, and it's slightly difficult to ensure everyone contributes equally in the group work. But that's also not the point. The group work, the main point, and is have people learn in a group environment. So obviously the people more capable than others, they might contributing a bit more to the coursework, and that's kind of expected. But that just requires everyone to be there when presenting the work. Okay, and everyone will receive the same mark. And people usually complain, say some people did more, but really this only just accounts for a small percent of the total coursework mark, really. So it does not affect the overall grade that much. Okay, and then each coursework also has the individual components. So these are actually account to the majority of the marks, and then these have to be done individually and much harder. And these still need to be demonstrated. So just to see, say, you actually understand the code, you created the code yourself. And people say, okay, I copied the code from online tutorials of watching some YouTube videos, and which is completely fine. But if you only blind copy the code, don't understand what it is, you will not get the mark. And that's what I will check in the demonstration to make sure you actually understand the code, not just copy it blindly. Okay, so you must demonstrate. And so if you submit the work, but you didn't demonstrate, you will not get any mark for the work. Yeah, so you have to demonstrate it. And if you have any reason, for example, you're ill, so you missed the demonstration deadline, we can arrange a different time. That's possible. Okay, and then for any part, as I said, if you couldn't explain how the code works, then you will not get mark for that part. And if you can't explain any of the code or how they work, you get 0 mark for the work. But say in some cases, it's only certain parts you can't explain. That's also fine, and you just lose mark for that particular part.
Sorry, sir, I've got a question.
Yeah.
With the group works, do we choose our groups, or is it going to be randomly selected?
Yes, so that's actually what we'll do this week. And the lab is to form the groups, and it's you choose your own groups. And I tried random, but it didn't work that well. So I'll let you to choose. So my only constraints is, say, each group have to be certain size. That's all. Then you can decide who you want to be in the same group with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, demonstration. So yeah, this is maybe just relatively small details. And for the group work, it's a bit different in presenting. For the group work, you're presenting to the entire lab. So each group will do the presentation, but the presentation is to the entire lab. So other groups can see as well. So this is also part of your learning experience. You can see how other group approach the problems. Maybe you can learn something from them, or maybe you can provide some feedback to them, say, okay, maybe the way of solving certain problems can be done better. Yeah. And then how many people presenting is really up to the group. You can decide to have 1 to your entire group presenting, as there's no particularly restrictions on that. Okay, and then for the individual work demonstration, this will be 1-to-1. Okay, it's not to the entire lab, only to me. And so I understand some people potentially a little bit nervous presenting to the entire lab. So that's why we do 1-to-1. So you will not be see anybody else presentation. Okay, and usually we need to complete all the demonstration of individual work and 2 weeks after the deadline. And so we will say have a deadline in week 7, then we should finish by week 9 of the individual demonstrations. And what we'll do is actually going to have these and how do I say the schedule and move in the My Learning course schedulers, which each of you can book a specific time for the demonstration. Let me see if I could find a node. Yeah. So for example, here is when the coursework is due, and in the week after, we can have demonstration. in the demonstration in the lab, and this is scheduler. Currently, I can't click because it says, and you're only allowed access if you are a student from 2022, and which currently as a student is not. So I need to go back to my normal row. Yeah. So quite. It's not working anymore. I have to redo it. But essentially, you should see a list of the slot available, and usually, for example, for one and so the whole lab is 1.5 hours. I'll break them into say 10-minute slots, and you can just click on one of the slots and you book one. So that's your slot. So everyone just pick a slot. Then for that session, and then that's all decided orders and who is demonstrating first, and in that particular lab. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now for the actual coursework, and the first one, as I said before, it's on the front end using Vue, and it's still week 8. And actually, you can see that from the module page, you will see easily. And so here I would say coursework 1 due, week 8, and this is when the coursework 2 due, week 15, and this is coursework 3 due. And also, if you go here, go to the assessment feedback. This is the old ones, but these will be updated as well. And you can see, and when you can have the same data when the group and individual work due for coursework 1, 2, and 3. And here is all for the individual work. This is the main component. And the other thing I want to mention here is for these ones, for this week, we will not have lectures or labs. So just give you time to work on. We're not going to introduce any more new things that week when the coursework due, and just give you time to work on coursework. And usually the week before, we will have time to answer your questions. And for example, the week 7, the lab will be just answer your questions about course 1. Hopefully you already have plenty. Usually you would have plenty by that time. It's same for the coursework 2 and 3. And you can see that's coursework 2 due, and then this is coursework 3 due. Okay, and so for coursework 1, and we will cover actually this in more details in the lecture later on, because some of the more technical things we haven't covered yet. But here, just give you a feeling. We'll revisit this in more details and before the deadline. And so creating the front end with the web app allows students and parents to look for and book after school classes and activities. Okay, and it must have use and Vue.js framework, because that's what we're covering, and not allowed to use single file component. And if you don't know what that is, that's completely fine, because that's something we'll cover later. Okay, and we must put it on GitHub repository with at least 10 commits. So just force you to use GitHub. If you don't do that, you will get 0 mark for the coursework. Okay, and must be available online using GitHub pages. And so this is essentially allow you to host your own website online. So that means your app is live on the web, so you can access it from anywhere by anybody. And then for the group task component, it's 10%, and you need to display at least one lesson the user can choose from. You have an add to cart button, and you manage to put the code onto the GitHub. And then the details are in the module handbook working schemes, and it's quite detailed. I just want to show you. And so again, to find module handbook is here, top of the page. It goes to module handbook. I recommend using this button on the left-hand side, and it'll give you the overview of different sections you can jump to quite quickly. If you're only interested in assessment, it's better just go straight there and click here. It goes to coursework 1. And then this is group coursework. Group coursework, when it's due, detailed marking scheme. And there's coursework, the individual component of coursework 1, deadline, additional requirements, marking scheme. Yeah. So the only thing that's still not quite there is for the coursework 3, individual work. And I'm still making some changes, but this is not due until the end of term, so you don't have to worry too much about that yet. And definitely will be there before then. But the details of all the other ones are already there. Okay, let me see if I can go back. Let me just close this one. Let's go here. Okay, and then the individual work, which you need to do individually, is much bigger. It's 25%, and the specific features. As I said, these are all generic features. Any e-commerce or even most websites would have them. And display here's lessons, or basically just a list of things, can be product or any other services. And sorting, add something to a cart, do checkout and do search. Yeah. And the thing I'm gonna cover here is this year, this is something a bit new, and it's something called the challenge component. So all these ones, I will give you almost step-by-step instructions how to implement them. So you have the examples, which is very similar what you need to do in the coursework. And I'll have a challenge component, which these are the things we're actually not going to cover in the lab or lecture. So you need to go online and research how to do it. Yeah. And if you couldn't figure out how to do this, and don't feel too bad, and it's completely normal. Itself is a bit more challenging compared to the things above. And also we didn't cover that in the lecture. So this is just for the students who find that doing this is a little bit too easy. Yeah. And so last year we had quite a few students who got 100% because they did everything. And I think maybe give them a little bit more challenging things to do. Also, this is a very useful thing to have as well, if you have a proper search functions in your app. Okay, and coursework 2, deadline week 15. As I said, this is building the backend for your app. So the first one is just the front end. Everything works locally in the browser. It doesn't talk to any database in any way. And then coursework 2, you add on to the database and the MongoDB, and actually mostly the express.js for the REST API. And we assume you already have some knowledge about MongoDB from the second year module. So we're not going to cover what is a collection, how do you do a query in MongoDB, those things. Yeah. And so again, some people find the express.js part slightly challenging, and so we'll see. And if you find it a bit difficult, again, don't panic. That's quite normal. And then we're going to be using Node.js, which you would have some experience by now anyway. But Node.js itself, we're not going to use that much. Essentially, just a server and providing a way to run the other things. Okay. And there's some requirements. I think most of them are quite obvious. So you must use Node. You're not allowed to use XAMPP or any other things. You might use it before. And you must access through REST API, not allowed to say directly accessing the database. And you must use Express. And there's other things to do different APIs. For example, there's more modern ones called GraphQL. All very nice, but for here, we just ask you to start with REST API using Express. And also, by the way, Express is kind of the default options for you doing REST API anyway. Very popular. Okay, and also, I'm going to force you to use promise and fetch when you try to access the API created by Express. And not allowed to use the XML HTTP request, which is like the version before promise and fetch. And you're also not allowed to use libraries, because these things actually are not that difficult to use. By using these libraries, it does actually not save you that much code anyway. And also by using these directly, you have a better understanding of what is actually happening. Okay, and in terms of the marking criteria and 10% for the group task, there's some specific requirements. You need to create a server using Express and create some routes, which will explain what they are. And this will get to there, and then you use the routes to retrieve. And from front end, you retrieve data using fetch, and then you display the result you get from your fetch. Again, the module handbook would have details. And if it does not make too much sense now, which is completely normal, and it will make more sense once we start covering Express.js in the second part. Okay, and then there's individual work. Okay, and maybe that's something interesting to say. And we're gonna require you to use MongoDB Atlas. So, which is like the cloud version of MongoDB. So it's hosted online, it's free to use to a certain limit. So you can have your MongoDB running in the cloud. So you don't have to worry about maintaining, updating, etc., etc. And there's a little bit extra required in terms of setting up, but once that's done, and it's almost carefree. And it's a bit different from what you did before. My understanding previously, you run locally on your machine, but then that creates a problem. For example, because your front end is hosted on GitHub pages, and it cannot access if your MongoDB is running locally on your computer. And it's possible, but you need to kind of jumping through the loops and to make it happen. Whereas if the front end is online, your backend is also online, then your apps can be run and perfectly well online. You don't need any of things from your locally. Okay, you might use the native Node.js. You're not allowed to use something like a Mongoose. I'll explain my reasoning in the lecture why I did this. Okay, and then finally, we're gonna host the middleware, the REST API part using something called a Heroku. And so it's like, how do I say? It's the equivalent of, say, MongoDB Atlas, but it's for the middleware or the REST API that allows you to host your API online. So again, you don't run it on your local computer, you run online. So all three parts of your app, the front end and the middle part and the database are all online. So they'll always be running and accessed by other people as well. You don't have to run on your computers. Okay, here the marking criteria for the individual work. Okay, and so we'll explain more after we get into the second part and after we cover some of these in the lectures. And just as before, we have this search and as the challenge component. So this time you will need to do search in the database. Again, we will not cover exactly how to do that. And you need to figure it out. Okay, and the last part is the progressive web apps. And deadline is 22. And yeah, so maybe useful to explain that as well. Let me go back here. So why the deadline is 22? So as you can see, so this is when the coursework is ready due, and we finished slightly earlier because we need 2 more weeks to do the demonstration of the coursework 3. So we don't want to finish in week 24 and then ask you to come back in week 25 and 26 to do the demonstration. Yeah, I don't think that makes any sense. And so we're gonna have the last coursework due, but also this avoids clashing. I'm sure many of the other coursework might do in week 24 as well. And then for the last 2 weeks, in the lab, we're going to do coursework straight demos. We're not going to have any lectures covering new material. In terms covering new content, finished by then, and the last 2 weeks just for demonstration of your work. Okay, and so we're going to try to turn what you built into a progressive web apps. And so you can install it on your phone and it can run offline as well. And we're going to talk more about advanced features and like the SFC. And if you remember, I mentioned it very briefly, stands for single file component, which is a unique feature of Vue. And in general, how to use components. So in a sense, it's almost like a class or a reusable block of code, and make your code more structured and easier to organize and reuse. Okay, and so there's 10% usual in-lab task. This is a group task, and these are the marking schemes. And as I said, and for the individual work part, there'll be 20%, and because in total is 30. So we have the first coursework 35, second 35, and then last we have 30. And the details of that one will be available soon. Yeah. As I said, this is the last coursework, which is not due until week 22 and will be definitely available way before that. Okay, and then in terms of extension and late penalties, and it happens, and maybe not to every person, but as a class in the whole, it always has people falling ill or have family emergencies, and then you will need extensions and for the coursework deadline. And so any extensions must be applied through extenuating circumstances services. There's an online form, and you don't need to contact me for any of their extensions. So actually, I'm not involved in this. If you essentially, when you go there and you need to submit a form which says and which module, which coursework you need extension, how long the extension needs to be, and provide some information, say why you need the extension, or maybe they'll ask you for some evidence as well. Okay, and because of the privacy concerns, I'm not meant to know what is the reason behind the extension. So that's why I'm not involved in this extenuating circumstance application process at all, whether it's approved or not. I'm not involved at all. Okay, for that reason. And so I can't really tell if it's successful, why the case. And so just use that form. And I think there should be a link in the module page. Sorry, in the module handbook. Overview. Let me see, I can. Okay, and so I don't think I put a link there, but I think by now most of you would know and how to use the extension extenuating circumstance form. There's a link in my study. It says 6.3 for details. Still no link here. Basically, and that's how you apply for any extension. Okay, and again, I think you probably would know this by now, and there are two types of extension. One called extension exactly, and these are for shorter ones for a few days or up to a couple of weeks or maybe 3 weeks maximum. And there's deferral. These are much longer, usually for a few months. And what you will see, they will call it until the next assessment point. So basically after the next exam period. That's usually what it means. Okay. And there's also the late penalty. So obviously, if you didn't have a good reason if your reason is only because, okay, you didn't plan properly, or you leave everything to the very last couple of days, you just find, okay, you couldn't quite and finish the work, and there will be late penalty. Okay, and the penalty is 5% for each day. So it depends on how long the work is late. 1 day is 5%, 2 days is 10, 3 days is 15, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and so if you are, say, if you've been late for 3 weeks, then probably no point to submit, and you wouldn't get any mark anyway. Okay, and the other thing I always try to emphasize, but I think in most cases student didn't quite get it the first time, is it's the 5% of the final mark, and it's not the 5% of the total module mark. And so if we go back a bit, for example, say for the last individual work, the total is 5%, 20%. Okay, the penalty is not saying if you are 1 day late, your maximum will be 15, and 2 days late, the maximum will be 10. It's not like that. So the way it works is, and for example, if you get 30 for your coursework, and you are 2 days late, and then your final mark would be 1 minus, so that's 5% and times 2. So that's for the 2 days you are late. And so that gives you 10%. That basically means overall, you have 90% of your coursework mark as your final mark. Yeah. And so in this case, and you are 2 days late, and you really only losing 3 marks. That's all. And if you 1 day late, and it's even less, it's 1.5 mark. Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. And so the idea will be, okay, if you only need a day or even 2 days to complete the work, it's probably better just take the later penalty, because you only lose 1 to maybe 3 marks maximum for that part, for the late. And then you can say, otherwise you may only be able to complete half of the coursework. Yeah. So there's really not much point. So if you're only a little bit late, the penalty is not much at all. Yeah, they only say have a much bigger impact once you say a week or 2 weeks late. Then you have a big chunk of the mark going to be taken out. Okay, I think we come to last a few slides now, and so communication. And the quickest way, just talk to me during the lectures or lab. That's probably the fastest way. You can get a response straight away. And the other option would be email me. I'm relatively good at replying emails, and sometimes same day or the day after. Sometimes if you email me at say 12 o'clock in the evening, I might still be working. I might reply to you straight away. Okay, but I'm not promising I will do that all the time. And yeah. You can also organize a face-to-face meeting. That'll be much more difficult. And I'll try to do it in the same week, but sometimes I can't guarantee, maybe have to be next week. And so for these meetings, and it will be an online like this, and unless there's absolute reasons that we have to do it in person, mostly just because COVID, I think both for me and your safety, and also save people the traveling. Okay, I think, this is not the last slide yet, second last. So we are talking about hybrid app development, particularly using JavaScript for the hybrid app development. You could use other language, but we're going to be using JavaScript, not native app development. And so I explain why we use it, but if you really say have your mind set on native app development, maybe this is not the module for you. We're going to cover these 3 main technical components: the front-end framework using Vue, the backend using Express.js, and make that into a progressive web apps. We're getting lots of live coding, and for the work, there will be both group and individual. And the individual is the main part, then the group is always kind of a precursor to the individual work. I have 3 coursework, 1 for each of these main components. And the work will be hosted online. Actually, eventually we will have a complete app and it will be working online. Everybody can try it out. And all the work needs to be demonstrated. Okay, and in terms of reading, it's the module handbook. I think I covered most of the things on module handbook. But do have a look at the handbook. It's quite detailed. It will take you a while just to go through all of this. Professional, yeah. I think maybe the most relevant one will be the marking details and the coursework marking criteria. And again, so some of them might not make much sense yet. Don't worry, I'm going to cover them later in the module. Okay. Yeah. So at the end of the module handbook, this is maybe useful as well. So it listed when is each coursework due. This is the teaching plan, lecture and labs, and this is when the coursework due. So this will be the group work, and this will be the individual work, and then we have weeks after for in-lab demonstration. And then when we doing the in-lab demonstration, and other students will be working on some lab exercise. Okay, is there any other question? Okay, I already saw 3 hands, but are these hands from before or is there new questions?
Yeah, I got a new question.
Yeah.
So currently I'm using Mac,
Yeah.
and last year I ran into a few issues with some softwares and some modules. So I was wondering if I'm gonna run into any issues for this module.
It is unlikely, and so I personally use a Mac, and
okay.
I didn't have any problems. But also the other thing is, as we said, everything will be hosted online. So it will not rely on anything on your local computer to run. So the front end, the back, the database, and the REST API all run online. So that's the same. Doesn't matter what your local computer is. It does not rely on that at all.
Oh, okay. So the software I'm gonna be using for this module is available for Mac.
Yeah. They will be
okay.
available. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. I have Ed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ed is fine.
Ed is fine.
I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure, are we gonna use the same app and develop it each coursework through the year, or we're gonna be building different apps?
No, it will be the same one. So that will be
The same one, yeah? Oh,
the same app. And the first coursework build front end, the second one build the back end, and the third one make it into a progressive web apps.
okay,
Add
perfect.
a bit of things. But yeah, in the end, you have one app, not 3 different ones.
Great, thank you.
And Williams?
Yeah, you didn't. So I didn't see any mentions of so are we using basic CSS, or can we use libraries like Sass and
Yes. Yeah. And so I didn't mention anything about CSS because it's not part of the marking criteria. And so there wouldn't be any marks, depends on how good the app looks like. But you are free to use you want to use Sass, or you want to use, say, Bootstrap or any other CSS libraries, yeah, for free, and feel free. And they should work well with same view.
Okay, thank you.
And RNAP, is it?
Yes. So regarding the app framework, so is it restricted to Vue.js, or we can use React maybe?
It will have to be Vue, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah. And it's okay. Just very quickly, I have to go. Already late for the next lab. And so the Vue is the simplest among the Angular, React, and Vue. Vue is the simplest, and they share many similar concepts. So if you learn to use Vue, lots of the concept you will be in the React, you will know straight away. Even the exact syntax will be a bit different. And also React is a bit more complex or be harder to learn actually to use. Anyway, we're going to talk more about that next week. Okay, I'll probably have to go to the next lab now. So maybe this James, I'll have answer your questions quickly.
About the lab, there will be any tasks to have for the coursework, and also is there any like help for the coursework for guidance?
Yes, and so if I understand the question, so and during the lab you will do exercise, which will help you to do the individual coursework, and especially the group work, which is doing kind of like a simpler, smaller version of the actual coursework. And then obviously, if you have any questions, I can help you during the lab in terms either the course and the individual work or the group work. Yeah. And okay. And I really have to go now, and because I have another class at 1, which I'm already late. So I have seen the chat, sorry, message in the, you see the chat of the questions. Yes, you will be able to pick your team members. That's what we do in the lab this week. So we're going to form the groups this week.